Let's talk about books that changed my life. Greetings, my name is Nina. Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to wear this hood, because why not? I've been watching YouTube lately, looking for ideas for the next video, and then I came across a video titled Books That Changed My Life. And then I thought, there are books that changed my life in some ways. Maybe they made me see things differently, or maybe I developed a fear of something, or maybe I actually did something after reading the book. Maybe I showed interest in something, or maybe I started annoying others with these books. Actually, I have made a video about books that changed my life. It's on my second channel. I actually rewatched it. The video is so awful, and the books are completely different than the ones I'm going to talk about in here. But anyway, let's go straight to the books. Now, of course, I'm going to start with the foundation of everything, of my reading. And yeah, obviously I'm talking about the Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling. These books absolutely changed me. These books, they made reading better. These books actually taught me a lot of important lessons, like you have to think for yourself, and that adults aren't always reliable, and sometimes you simply have to rebel, sometimes you have to break the rules. And above all, after reading this book, I decided that I wanted to be a writer too. So I went and wrote my own novel. That's the most important part, I think. I actually could say how this series affected me, but that would take another video, so let's move on, shall we? I will try to speak about these books as briefly as possible. Sure, after reading Harry Potter, I decided that I wanted to be a writer, but what are a few core lessons that I learned about writing? Where did I learn them? I learned them in this book. This is On Writing by Stephen King. So in Russian, this book is translated as How to Write Books. I think this is a stronger title than On Writing. And this is what got me to buy this book in the first place. I remember I paid 12 lari back then. It's so old. I think I bought this book in 2011. You know what? I do really want to have Stephen King books in hardcovers, but this one I actually like. This edition, maybe because the cover is pretty. Just look at it. Okay, in the first half of the book, Stephen King speaks about his life. This is basically his autobiography. And sure, when I read it for the first time, I thought it was kind of bordering and even misleading. But now when I think about it, I realize that it's also about handling rejection from the publisher. And this is important, I think, because Stephen King got rejected a lot. And the second half of the book dedicated to actually useful advice. Well, two lessons I learned from this book. Avoid the passive voice. Well, for example, this book was read by me. You shouldn't write that. And then Stephen King really doesn't like adverbs, and he's like, avoid them, because these words are parasites. I think that he used that word. Okay, now when I think about it, I should reread the book, because if I read this book now, I might discover even more lessons, but these are the two lessons that I learned from Stephen King on writing. Let's move on. Well, speaking of Stephen King, there's another book of his in this video. Keep in mind, I rarely talk about this book, or even this one. I wouldn't call it a favorite. I wouldn't even call it my favorite Stephen King book, but it's still the story that affected me when I was 13 years old. Even though technically I discovered the story from the 1976 film. And obviously I'm talking about Carrie. By the way, this edition has the poster of the 2013 film. I watched all three adaptations of Carrie. The first adaptation that came out in 1976 is still the best. I must confess, I'm not easily scared by Stephen King stories. Sure, Misery scared me a lot, but I picked Carrie instead of Misery, and there are multiple reasons behind that. Well, because Carrie is the first Stephen King story I came across. I'm deliberately using the word story here because I did not discover Carrie because I read the book. I discovered it because I first watched the film. Well, technically my first Stephen King book was Pet Sematary. But I picked Carrie, well, because it's a really memorable story. Yeah, the story of this girl, Carrie White, resonated with me on some level, but I picked this one for one simple reason. Even though the book itself did not scare me, it was definitely the book that gave me a fear. And what's that fear? Fanatics. Fanatics of any kind, they scare me. Yeah, I know that this book deals mostly with religious fanatism, but fanatism comes in different shapes and forms. She's above all obsessed with this author. Carrie's mother, she frightened me more than any of Carrie's bullies did. Okay, next comes the book that really made me suffer. But it did change my life. And the book is The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Is it difficult to read for the first time? Yes. Is it difficult to read for the second time? Yes. Is it difficult to read for the third time? Well, I need to read the book to tell you that, but I think it's going to be difficult all the same. But nonetheless, I'm definitely glad that I read the book for one simple reason. This is the book where I found the concept for behind my novel Nightingale Divine. I just wouldn't say no more. I'm just going to say that I read The Silmarillion. It's about various different characters in Middle-earth, and each chapter is dedicated to the creation of the world, the elves, the dwarves, the men, etc. And this is where I found the concept behind my novel. I thought I would interpret it in my own way. Gonna confess that I deliberately did not touch The Silmarillion because after I decided to use the concept to write my book, because I wanted to come up with my own ideas. Yeah, the concept is actually really good. I don't know, maybe you read my novel or maybe you read The Silmarillion too. Then you'll know which concept I'm talking about. This is how The Silmarillion changed my life. I found the concept behind my book, and this is how my book came to exist. I used to be an avid reader as a kid, but then I moved. I left a lot of my books in Moscow, and I had to build my library anew. Because of school, I did not read much, and after school ended, I decided to go back to reading. And this is the book that changed my life because it was the first book that I read after so many years. And the book is Martin Eden by Jack London. Do I remember much from this book? No. Do I remember important events that happened here? Well, some of them. After all, I read the book back in 2013. I rarely talk about this book. Really rarely. It's not my favorite book of all time. The reason it changed my life was because this book revived my love for reading. And then I got myself my own copy. I read my aunt's copy. But I do remember enjoying this story very much. And I actually read this book in 2 days, as I remember. And then comes my biggest obsession of the previous decade. I spoke a lot about this book, this series to be exact. A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So I have an entire video on my channel called Watch This Before Getting into A Song of Ice and Fire. Feel free to check it out. How did this book change my life? This book actually opened my eyes on human nature. Not only the negative side of it, but also the positive side of it. So throughout the series you meet various different characters from all colors of the spectrum. Each character wants something, each character is willing to use different methods to get it. Some characters are simply awful, well, they are evil, they're really bad. Some characters are really positive. Some characters are neutral, some are more positive than negative, and vice versa, and yada yada yada. And also this series is also about how far are people willing to go to get what they want. Around 10 years ago, when I read this series was about betrayal and how everything is awful, everything is brutal, people are corrupt for power, yada yada yada. But now when I think about the series, I realize that there is a lot of positive sides. Families caring about each other. You have some really loyal characters. Despite anything, the series does feature characters who aren't willing to betray people, the characters who are willing to help, and you name it. I also have a degree in international relations, and the way power is portrayed here also affected my studies, and I saw my studies very differently. After reading A Song of Ice and Fire, I read The Prince by Machiavelli. I think I should reread the book because now I would see the book differently right now. Now when I think about it, maybe Machiavelli wouldn't meet his own standards if he was given power. And despite anything, this book isn't entirely Machiavellian. Just read the series, because there's more than just shocking betrayals and deaths and you name it. There's a lot more to the series than that. Next comes the books that I read recently. I simply wanted to read a popular book just to get my mind off things. At the end of the day, I found my new favorite book that I even made an entire video about it, and this book is Summer in a Pioneer Tie by Yelena Malisova and Katerina Silvanova. Did you hear how I pronounced their names? Well, after all, Russian is my first language, and the way I pronounce Russian names is different. So I heard about this book. Everybody talked about it on TikTok. So everybody on Russian Book talk about this book. The cover is really nice, and I decided to give it a chance. I took it at the library, and wow. How did this book change my life? Well, I started annoying my family with various questions like, did you go to the summer pioneer camp? Why did you do this? Did you do that? You name it. This is how I started annoying my family and asking them questions. The two main characters from the book were born in the 60s. The same decade my own parents and aunts and uncles were born, and gonna ask them more questions about their upbringing because that's a really interesting topic. And my TikTok and also my TikTok feed was full of videos dedicated to this book, and same with Pinterest board. My Pinterest board is overrun with the artworks from this book. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, A Song of Ice and Fire also influenced me to know at least a little bit more about history. Yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire and Sabaton are really good at inspiring you to know more about history, although they are about very different sides of history. And next comes the next book that changed my life is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. How did this book change my life? You'd probably think that this book changed my life because it made me think differently. Maybe it made me see the things in a different light. Wrong. How did this book change my life then? Well, so in this book, the Moleskine journals are mentioned. So I've heard of Moleskines before, but didn't think of them much until I read Yellowface. And after I read Yellowface, I was like, maybe I should get a Moleskine. So yeah, I have two of these. And yeah, journaling has never been better. Next comes the comics that changed my life. It was a really dark and brutal comics. Well, technically I've seen the screen adaptation first, but then I did read the comic, and both the comics and the TV show, they kind of horrified me. And if you are not ready to get frightened too much, you shouldn't get into them, I think. The Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman. Okay, the show is dark. The comics is even darker. It's really scary. How did it change my life? Well, it made me realize that humans are scarier than zombies. Okay, now let's go to the positive side of things. Well, The Walking Dead is great. Well, at least it used to be. Until around season 5 or 6. and I've stopped reading the comics after the spoiler Negan arc. I think Negan arc was a good ending to the comics, and that was enough for me, and I just couldn't handle the darkness anymore. So yeah, let's move to the last book in this video, and this The Neverending Story by Mikhail Ende. So this is a really unique fantasy book that I've spoke a lot about, The Neverending Story, on this channel. How did this book change my life? Well, it made me think in a certain way. This book is about the importance of escapism, but also about the importance of going back to reality. I think this book handled the topic even better than the Narnia books did. This book is also about how fantasy can be used in real life. Well, the dialogue between Atreyu and Gmork is about that. This how fantasy can be used to manipulate others. Yeah, this book gave me a perspective. And that's all. These are the books that changed my life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. What are the books that changed your life? Let me know down in the comments. See you next time. Goodbye.